If you're a movie buff, then you'll no doubt have certain films in your mind which are all-time classics. Movies which are just perfect releases that you just hope they won't turn into sequels for money-grabbing purposes. Although it seems a monthly occurrence now that a classic movie from the past is either remade in full or having a sequel made years after the original, it wasn't so much of an issue back in the 90s. Blues Brothers, the seminal 1980s musical action comedy, was one such film which really should have never been touched again. It was such an amazing piece of cinema and gave lead actors John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd a film which was so significant that it was selected for preservation by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically and aesthetically significant. It made over 4 times its original budget. It packed in epic car chase sequences, a perfect blend of comedy, and let's not forget its soundtrack being one of the best ever compiled. So with a masterpiece in the can, who the hell thought it was a good idea to even come up with a sequel nearly 20 years later? Blues Brothers 2000 flopped hard on its theatrical release in early 1998 and it barely broke even. It was panned by critics, the public shared that view I have as it being a needless sequel, and with key cast members deceased, it was a crazy production choice. However though, before its release the expectations around it being another huge blockbuster hit were expected. As we all know, where there's a hit movie predicted, there's bound to be games released to cash in on its success, to ride those movie coattails all the way to the bank, and to put a quick cash grab ahead of any real quality. So who better to do this than our good old friends at Titus? In a previous video I did, I discussed the full history of Titus, and I explained that Titus had a very clear business objective when it came to creating video games on the N64 and for some of the other platforms at that time. They wanted to acquire lesser known licenses which they could get for cheap and use that to maximise their profit potential by releasing games with instant brand recognition. They'd already had some success with this strategy on the N64 with games like Automobili Lamborghini and Hercules. But although they had competition from other companies wanting the Blues Brothers 2000 rights, they went big to ensure that they made this acquisition. As soon as they acquired the rights to the game, they began working on the design documents and started asset creation in-house at Titus Interactive France. They did this to allow themselves to have plenty of time to shop the game around for an external company to take over development. During this time they actually got a lot of interest, and at one point the game was set to be handed over to H2O Entertainment, but ultimately the game was given to Player One for completion. H2O actually had some success on the N64 with games like Tetrasphere, but Player One had a number of N64 games under their belt, albeit none had been a significant hit with players. I feel that Player One had bitten off more than they could chew here because they were also working on Hercules and had just finished up working on Roadsters for the N64, and so they certainly liked to keep themselves busy. This time though, their workload took its toll as the game suffered significant delay after delay after delay. Originally planned as a 1999 release, which was still over a year from the movie's launch, it wasn't until the year 2000 that the game hit store shelves. By this point, the cross-promotion with the film would be dead in the water, and so the game would really need to hold its own to have any chance of success. So this brings us finally to Blues Brothers 2000 on the N64. Loosely based on the movie of the same name, it's a unique blend of platforming, exploration and musical elements that, to give it some credit, did try to do something more unique than your usual collectathon platformer, but don't worry, I will come back to that collecting element in a moment. Starting the game you play as Elwood, who's in jail. He needs to get the band back together for the Battle of the Bands, which takes place in just 2 days' time. Thankfully Elwood is due to be released from jail that very day, but the evil warden has other ideas and he plans to keep Elwood locked up to ensure that he misses this big event. And so begins the quest. Starting off in the jail, you'll need to help rescue the guitarist of your band, defeat the warden and make your escape. The prison is broken down into smaller cells or holding areas, and typically there's a small platforming section or a puzzle to solve in each of the rooms in order to progress. As you explore the jail, there's musical notes you'll need to find, as well as keys to unlock new areas and musical instruments your band members will need. This collection aspect to the game runs throughout, and it actually kind of works really well here and makes sense. It gives you a reason to explore each area and not just quickly speed run from room to room. There's also a good quality mix of events that take place in each of the game's 4 worlds. The puzzles are fairly simplistic and straightforward, and so you're not going to get bogged down with any overly complicated scenarios. The item locations are logical, and the range of enemies in the game is actually pretty decent. The low point for me when playing, however, are the musical rhythm sections. Now, if you're a fan of games like Parappa the Rapper or the Hero range of games, then you may enjoy these. But I have the rhythm of an MIT science graduate, and so I found those elements in the game to be more annoying than enjoyable. They break up the gameplay, but for me it wasn't an enjoyable way, and sadly you do have to complete all of these progressively harder sequences to progress the game. After the jail, you rinse and repeat in new areas such as Chicago, the cemetery and the swampland. Whilst only 4 worlds may sound fairly small, there's actually a lot of gameplay packed into each of them with many sub-levels that you'll need to fully explore. There's a range of power-ups which go from helpful to the downright ridiculous, but what causes problems here is the level design. Whilst the first world in the prison is very well designed, things fall apart pretty much straight away after that, and the worlds often end up becoming a confusing rotation of getting lost, sometimes not knowing exactly what you need to do, and your progression being halted. This isn't helped by the game's combat, which is downright awful. Your punches and kicks require you to basically be a pixel away from the enemy to have any chance of landing a hit. As most enemies take 2 or more hits, you're almost guaranteed to take damage in every enemy encounter. Now, this is helped if you build up your health meter with additional hearts, but this isn't all that easy, which results in you taking so many deaths, especially in the early parts of the game due to your lack of health. You'll often just want to avoid enemies altogether and just find ways around them rather than engaging in combat with them. Of course, this could be forgiven if the game handled well, but sadly this has to be one of the poorest controlling games I've played on the system. I read some reviews to get a sense of the view on this at the time of the game's release, and I was shocked to see quite a few mention the game having tight controls. That's absolute nonsense. There's a very real and noticeable lag between you pressing buttons and your actions taking place on screen. Now, for a game which has incredibly large amounts of actual platforming, this makes the game almost unplayable in a lot of moments. You'll tear your hair out as time after time the exact same jumps will seem almost impossible with how poorly the controls are responding. There's some Crash Bandicoot style sections in the game which are chase sequences which will throw a large number of jumps in a short section which require 100% perfect movement in order to get past them. Sometimes your button presses will land, other times they won't even register, and there's really no pattern to get used to, it just seems completely random. By the time you get to the cemetery and swamp worlds, the game really throws these complex jumping sections at you in quick succession, with one small mistake in a jump often sending you back a significant distance, or causing you to burn through your lives, of which there are not that many given to you. They also made some completely bizarre control choices. You do have a long range attack which requires you to press R and Z at the same time to throw your hat, but this can never seem to be pulled off with any consistency. They also gave you a backflip which can be pulled off by pressing the L button. Let's think about this. You're controlling the game with the analog stick and they expect you to press the L shoulder button to do a backflip. It's just absolute madness. It's not all negative in Blues Brothers 2000, however. I don't know what I'm thinking by saying this, but I actually really like the visuals. Maybe I'm going soft in my old age, but there's something enjoyable here with the way that the game looks. Sure, there's no HD textures, no expansion pack support, and it's definitely not going to be anyone's list of games that really push the N64 from a visual perspective, but I quite enjoyed it and I found that there's something almost cartoon-like in its softness to the game. I'm pleased they didn't try and go for a realistic look with the game because, well, that would have looked atrocious, but I think that the style that they went for here works with its very cartoon-like aesthetic. This is further helped by the art direction which made each of the 4 worlds feel really unique. There's a lot of character in the worlds, from the claustrophobic nature of the jail to the spooky cemetery. The streets of Chicago and their skyscapes and sewers, and the almost fairy-like setting of the swampland. Each area feels alive with plenty going on for you to explore and see, and there's some quirky NPCs thrown in for you to interact with. No doubt though that the game's best department is its audio. Praise the Lord that they licensed the movie soundtrack for the most part, and so the game features instantly recognisable tracks such as Otis Redding's Respect, which, although it's just MIDI versions, they bring some much needed fun and a certain cool factor into the game. The audio effects on the other hand will definitely grind on you by the time you finish the game. Every time your character jumps, you get the same horrible boing noise, and I really suggest that you just turn off the effects down in the options menu to save your sanity if you plan to play this game for longer than an hour at a time. Speaking of which, it's not really a long game by any means, perhaps best suited to what would have been a weekend rental, because most people I imagine could finish off the game in less than 10 hours, and for any platform game fans you could probably do it in half that amount of time. The game does support 2 players, but sadly it's not a co-op experience to do the story mode, but it's basically just a rhythm game. You play it once, then turn it off, and so calling this a multiplayer game is factually correct, but in reality it's definitely not a multiplayer game. Overall, Blues Brothers 2000 still feels like a missed opportunity. Nobody, myself included, would have been expecting a AAA title coming from Titus, but it does just feel like an unfinished game. Some sections and elements of the game are genuinely fun to play, and the first world leads you into a false sense of security as, dare I say it, the prison is actually fun to play. But the fun factor quickly weans off, with some horrid level design, controls which never seem to work the way they should, and platforming elements which had no place being in an early NES game, never mind an N64 game with so many classic platformers already showing you how to do this. But as always, it's over to you. Did you pick up Blues Brothers 2000 back in the day, or did you steer clear of this one after the game's negative reviews when it got released? Were you one of the unfortunate ones who saw a glowing review of the game in the official Nintendo magazine and picked it up without realising there was some clear bias here from the reviewer? Can you think of any other movie licensed games which you think never should have existed? As always, let me know your thoughts and feelings, comments and opinions down below, and until next time.